Good morning, guys. It's an honor to be sitting with two great Americans that I've had the honor and the privilege to serve with during the course of my career. And really, we've got I think maybe some unique experiences between the three of us, especially with leading large organizations, and some of the leadership lessons that we can pull out of that on a macro level. I was doing the math. I think between the three of us, we got 102 years total Air Force time under our belts. So I don't know if that makes us smarter, but certainly makes us older, if nothing else. I'd like to go around, just kind of get a quick background on us before we talk about some of these issues, and hopefully we can throw a few good nuggets out there for lessons learned.
Yep.
Awesome.
Well, thank you, Dave. I graduated from high school in 1974 and promptly enlisted and went to the Air Force Academy prep school for a year, and then graduated from the academy in 1979 and served another 39 years after that. So my total active duty time is 40 years and some change. 6 overseas assignments, multiple assignments in the States, obviously. Was fortunate and blessed to fly from pretty much the beginning to the end of my career, and had the opportunity to lead men and women in combat operations, and it was just a spectacular experience.
Amen. Amen to that. Dirk?
I didn't know you were a preppy also.
I am.
So I too attended the Air Force Academy Prep School before getting an appointment. Graduated there. Was blessed to fly F-15s and F-22s for quite a while. But the thing I really enjoyed the most about my career was really the last half, where I got to command. And in particular, had some really interesting missions. I got to command the task force that supports the operations in Antarctica for the National Science Foundation.
Wow.
Got to command in combat in the Middle East a few times. And I was always put into a situation where I wasn't ready for commanding such a diverse type of an operation. So everyone was a great learning experience for me, so that was the thing I enjoyed most.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Unfortunately, I'm not a preppy, so it's not we don't have a quorum on that. But I grew up in Tennessee. I went to the Air Force Academy, graduated in 1989. Served 30 years to the day for my retirement orders. Was commissioned on May 31st, and my retirement orders were June 1st, 30 years later. Was lucky enough to fly the A-10 for most of my career. Flew a few other aircraft along the way. And I can't agree with you more, Dirk, on the back half of the career being the most rewarding part of it, because it was the opportunity to command, to lead, to influence others, to mentor others, to hopefully put them in the best position to command once they have the opportunity or the chance. And getting to do it a couple of times downrange. So, as commander at Kandahar for a year in 2010 to 2011, as the operations group commander there, running combat operations and flying A-10s. And then 2016 to 2017 was the commander of NATO TAC Air and U.S. forces building and flying combat and living with the Afghans in Afghanistan. So
Yeah.
I think the one thing that's certainly common between the three of us is we've got a lot of experience and time leading large, diverse organizations, both geographically diverse and diverse with the missions that they do. So I think one of the things that was always interesting to me, and one of the things that was always difficult from my perspective, was in that diverse and large organization, you don't get a chance to see and work with the individuals, and the commanders are below the commander level that you have every day, day in and day out. So you don't get to see some of the problems that might be bubbling up, or anticipating some of the problems that might be coming next. And would like to get your perspective on how you tried to do that in a large organization as the commander.
I'll start, Dave. Thank you for that question. I had the privilege to command, I think, 9 different times in my career. From small levels to, as you said, large multi-thousand person organizations. But I always started the same way. When I would show up, I'd give a survey out to the key supervisors, subordinate commanders and senior ensign, non-commissioned officers. And the thrust of it was, I wanted to know what they thought were the 3 best things that their organization was doing. I wanted to know what their 3 biggest challenges were for the next coming year. I wanted to know what their thought solutions to those challenges would be. And then I would gather that information and I'd look for general themes for the organization as a whole. And that would be the beginning of my start of a strategic plan for where this organization I needed it to go over the next 2 or 3 years. And then on the heels of that, I would then also try to do what we call unit climate assessments, anonymous if you will, try to get as many people participate and just get a real feel for, where were those challenges? How are they being led? How are they being resourced? How are they being supervised? What was the quality of life issues? And again, looking for themes. And that would be the way that I would wrap my head around, the organization and give me an idea of where I think we need to go.
Absolutely, absolutely. Dirk?
I think in addition to that, there's got to be, a commander typically has to look up and out often, right? And lead up and out. He or she has to have a very close relationship with the number 2 or a deputy. And while I enjoyed the opportunities that I had to command myself, some of the most rewarding, believe it or not, were being a number 2 or a deputy to basically mind meld with my commander, my director, understand what his or her, campaign was, what the guidance was, and then work both inside the organization and laterally, right?
Absolutely.
To look for those gaps and seams and pursue them at my level so the boss didn't have to worry about it. And then if we did uncover something that needed his change in vector or more resources, I'd facilitate bringing that information together to then offer, sir, we think we might have a problem on the horizon. Here's why we think it's coming up. And I think you need to adjust your campaign and shift some resources in this direction to mitigate that risk.
It's a team sport. I couldn't agree more how critical the number 2, the deputy or the vice is. The one I found to be equally critical to me was our senior enlisted
Command chief. Absolutely.
command chief, we call him, and I found that person to be darn near irreplaceable. My eyes, my ears, my mouthpiece many times, and got to go through doors that I didn't always get to go into.
Right.
Those invisible doors, I call them,
Yep,
that they could open and walk through, and just invaluable to keep me rooted and grounded and focused on the right areas.
Yeah, it really brings the conversation, you said, as a team. It's also a shared understanding of your mission and your situation.
Absolutely.
And a shared understanding of where your challenges are at all echelons, which requires the leadership to create an environment where there can be honest communication.
Right.
So that idea of culture, of it's okay to speak up, it's okay to ask for help, and if there's a mistake, it's fessed up, and the team surrounds that area of the mistake and looks to fix it and move forward.
Yeah, and I could not agree more on the communication aspect of it, because if you don't create that environment of two-way communication, so if you as the commander are the one that's always giving direction but never receiving input, or never being perceived as being able to receive input from anyone but your closest advisors, a lot of times that I got the impression, at least, that would turn off some of the lower levels of the organization for pushing up what was actually wrong, or what the actual issues and problems were. So that communication and building that confidence and trust in the culture that you talk about, I thought was essential. And part of that was one thing I always like to do, just because I loved getting out and talking to folks and seeing what was going on, understanding their missions better, which helped me understand better as a commander what we needed as an organization, was getting out and about, and not necessarily getting out and about on planned events to the different units, but showing up there on a Friday afternoon and kind of surprising them a little bit, maybe drinking a beer with them, and kind of catching up and seeing what the environment is. And you kind of could sniff out, or you could kind of get some ideas of, hey, there might be a little problem going on here, just based on how the dynamics of just walking into the squadron, where it looked like a mausoleum this afternoon and nobody's talking and everybody left at 3 o'clock on a Friday. So maybe we need to investigate that a little bit more, look into it a little bit more. And it was not about being a dictator. It was more about giving them the tools they needed to be happy, healthy, and be able to thrive as an organization. One piece of that, or another aspect of that, is that I always saw was interesting, and it was more of a challenge as you got, I think, higher in rank, was how do you do risk acceptance and get your commanders to understand what accepting risk is, as you give them their roles and responsibilities and authorities below you. Did you do anything special when you first took command with your commanders to kind of address those issues?
Well, I did, and it goes back to that, if you will, my kind of survey that I would give to them. And by the way, I have applied this into the private sector as well. When I stepped off military and have worked in a nonprofit, I applied some of these exact same techniques. But what you're looking for is, where are your biggest challenges? You can call them problems, you can call them challenges. I like to coin every challenge as an opportunity. But you got to get that. You got to root that out. It's not just going to pop up to you if you don't root it out. And what I encourage my subordinate leaders to do is identify for me where they believe they might be under-resourced, where they might be undermanned, where they might be under-supervised, and where their people are overworked. If you can identify those areas and see if they exist, the manning, the supervision, the resourcing, and the workload, you can really lead turn problems.
Absolutely.
If you don't find those and they're ignored, they can be catastrophic.
And they will show up eventually.
They will show up, and they can actually have devastating effect on an organization.
Absolutely.
So that, to me, was what I tried to do. As you know, both of us, all three of us, have dispersed, ops, if you will, where when you lead large organizations, they're not right under your tent. You have to go out and about. And it's really important that you either go out to them or you bring some of them to you, and you really have an opportunity for your team to share with you their challenges and their perceived problems.
Absolutely. Dirk?
Yeah, I think I had a commander once where it's not uncommon for a leader to have several subordinates that are competing for resources within the organization. Right?
Yeah.
And if there's an environment where the subordinates are actually really competing and trying to take advantage and outmaneuver each other, that's not a good situation.
No.
And so, as a commander, I went to my commander and I said, "Sir, I'm having a challenge here. You're asking me to do, 10 things. I think I only have enough bandwidth to do about 6. And sir, what I think I need to do is take these 4. 2 of them, I'm going to just try to maintain them as best I can, but they're not going to get any better. These are going to fail. Sir, will you own that risk for me?" And then there's a conversation about if that's the best way to take risk, if that's the smartest way to take risk. And then there's a two-way understanding of a framework for decision making going forward that then we know we're going to operate on. And then you accept the fact as the boss that I've told you these areas may falter. And then if the conditions change, we have that conversation again.
That's great. I like that.
Yeah, that is great. One thing I tried to do, particularly the last few commands and the 2 wing commands I had, as I did the initial kind of move about the organizations and talking with the subordinate commanders, I gave them a homework assignment for when I, first time had a chance to really talk to them one-on-one. I said, I want 3 things that you think your organization is doing well in right now. I want 3 things you think your organization needs improvement in right now. And I want 3 things where you either need resources or assets to make your organization better. And it forced us to oftentimes have a conversation that was, they had to go home and think about it. It's not something they could just spit out off the top of their head in our first meetings or our first time we got together. They had to go actually do a little bit of homework on their organization, their unit, and think about what they needed. And it also at least gave us, especially with the command chief and the vice, it gave us a little bit of an idea of where or what some of those issues might be popping up or might possibly pop up as far as what they're not getting resource-wise, and then we could get after it or start trying to get after it a little bit.
That's awesome.
One other thing I think talking about as we talk about subordinate commanders and working with them is, did you have any special techniques, special say directions or instructions as you took command of the organizations for getting your subordinate commanders to understand either shared risk or how you're going to share risk, or how you're going to take responsibility for actions that sometimes don't necessarily work out as planned for decisions you make as a commander?
Well, that's a loaded question. I really appreciate it. It's not an easy one to answer. I believe that in any organization, people need to understand their role, their responsibilities, and the authority they have. Don't give responsibility without authority. And that's the tendency that I've found both in the military and outside of the military, is we give people responsibility, but we don't give them the authority. And that's a foul.
Absolutely.
So I wanted commanders and supervisors for me to understand, here are my expectations, here's your role, here are your responsibilities, and this is the authority you have or you don't have. Are there any questions? Let's make sure we are clear on that. And I found that to be the best way to help that shared risk and what they were responsible for and had the authority to control.
Absolutely.
I'll bridge from my last comment. So I just went to my boss's office, told him to own my risk. And I didn't tell him, I asked him. Right, I said, sir, will you own this risk? We had a conversation, and now he understands that I've got to go back and talk to my people, right, who had just equipped me, right, with their challenges. I've got to go back and tell them now they're not going to get any more resources, okay? And so now we've got to have a conversation about, all right, we all acknowledge we don't have everything we need, but we're going to take risk in these areas, and we're going to focus on these areas. Now let's talk about indicators in each one of those priority areas where things are going well, and indicators where things might not be going well. Let's make sure we have a shared understanding of those indications. Let's be vigilant for them, and then let's make sure we've got a good process to report and have feedback so we can adjust our plan.
Absolutely. And I think, everything we've said here really circles back to positive and effective and consistent communications, and doing it in a two-way fashion so your subordinate commanders are comfortable coming to you with problems or issues, as opposed to maybe being hesitant to bring you bad news or things that are not necessarily going to be a good thing. And I always, and I know especially working for you directly, sir, I always try to live by the motto of be the top cover for your subordinate commanders so they can make the decisions with the authorities that you give them. And if they make a mistake with those decisions and things don't turn out as well as expected, they don't get crucified for it, and they don't get in trouble for just trying to do the best thing with the roles, responsibilities, and authorities that they've been given.
I wholeheartedly salute that, Dave. One of the things that I've learned and tried, and again, made many mistakes along the way, but to understand the difference between mistakes and how you handle mistakes versus willful disobedience. And there's a big difference.
Yes, there is.
And how you handle those need to be dealt with differently. And the thing that I want to try to assure people that I work with and for and around is not to be looking over your shoulder. Be courageous, lead courageously, make courageous decisions. If you make the wrong decision or something wrong happens, let's do the debrief. Pick ourselves up. What went wrong? Why did it go wrong? What are we going to do different? Dust the dust off and charge, you know, as the Army says, drive on.
Exactly.
And I think that environment is really important, and it has to be set at the top.
It does.
Now, when people do something and they're doing it and it's wrong and they know it's wrong and they do it anyway, there's a different way to deal with that. But I have found that's not the norm. That's normally the exception.
Exactly. I agree.
Yeah, I think as we sort of come back around and round out this great conversation, I think there's a saying that I developed over time, and it's every time I took a new job and had responsibility as a commander, from the day one I wanted to work myself out of a job.
Yes.
I did not want to be a single point of failure, and I didn't want to have a situation where if I had to leave for an emergency, if I wasn't available, that the organization stopped. And that requires basically being vulnerable enough to share information, to share power. And as long as everyone has a common framework for how we're going to operate and how we're going to take risk, it really works well.
I love that.
Exactly. Everybody's bought in at that point.
Yeah.
I'd like to say thanks to A, for having an opportunity to serve with the two of you for 30 years. It was an honor and a privilege. And it's an honor and a privilege to be with you at Victory Strategies.
Both of you are still teaching me like you always have.
Well, that's both ways, sir. That's both ways.
Thank you
Thanks.
both.